Hello, 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 hello. Today I'm talking with Dave West. We talked about the Platinum Rule and the difference between being kind and being nice. I'm Ivanul from Who's Agile. My pronouns are he and him. Welcome to my channel. You see a lot of agilists around me on this screen. If you want to hear me interviewing, please click that subscribe button because these are the people that I've invited so far. If you think I'm missing people, let me know in the comments. And that like button, well, if you liked today's interview, don't forget to click it.
Are you a Scrum or Agile enthusiast? Would you like to grow in your role? Or would you like to connect with peers around the world? Then the Online Scrum Master Summit is just for you. My name is Esther Schmid, and I'm the main host of this global summit. You can join us from the 17th to the 19th of June, all virtually. So join us because we have great keynotes, insightful talks, and hands-on workshops. So go to osms25.com and register for free. Looking forward to see you there.
Hello everyone, and hello with me. I have Dave. How are you?
I'm good actually. Yeah, I'm feeling quite full of energy and ready for a nice conversation, Eve.
Well, and before we jump into that conversation, I want to show a little bit on where we are. And I'm in Ghent, in Belgium. And at this moment, if I'm correct, you're in Boston. So we're traveling all around the globe to show you
I am.
where
I'm
we
actually
are.
just outside Boston in a little place called Weston,
Well,
which
I
Western
didn't want
Mass.
I didn't want to help the stalkers with an exact location, but you never know. So
Yes,
I
the
have
problem with the
no idea how
internet
many.
is they have that.
Exactly. So yeah, so that's always better to just show a little bit on where we are without going into full details. So and from my side, it's here. It's like a couple of minutes. Well, it's a little bit more than 10 minutes after 7 in the evening. What's the time on your side?
It's 1 o'clock in the afternoon, well, just after, like 1:10, 1:12 in the afternoon, and it's 79 degrees Fahrenheit, obviously not Celsius, because that would be very scary, and I'm not sure I'd be here. But
Uh,
yes, it's a lovely day here in the Boston area.
Let me check at this moment. It's 23 degrees Celsius in Belgium in Ghent. So
So
that's
about the same, isn't it? I can't do my math.
I had to say, like, I always think in Celsius, and I hardly know what is in Fahrenheit.
Uh,
I'm really happy that these days that I had to know this are gone. To be honest, yeah, but it's already where we see a difference between indeed some of the worlds that we're living in. Yeah, in Europe, a lot more people are working with Celsius than in the US, I would say.
It is actually interesting because I moved to America 25 years ago, and the UK at that point was just going through a little bit of a transition. And
Mm-hmm.
so they would always give both, or depending on how old the weather person was, they would lead with one and then say, oh, and for our metric friends, they would
Mm-hmm.
say Celsius. So I'm not sure it's connected to metric or not, but but since I moved to America, yeah, I've had to completely relearn everything, and I do miss the metric system, particularly when you're measuring things. I have no idea, when you're trying to put a shelf or something, and you get a tape measure out, and people are like, "Oh, well, it's 7 7/3 of an inch." I'm like, "What? Why would
What?
you not use millimeters and centimeters?" And it's just so much better. But I have friends of mine that are more handy than I am, and they love it. When they do jobs, they're like they just have the math in their head. So yes, it is, we're all different, but yeah, I guess.
I think yeah, differences are there, and definitely one of the big differences between I think the US and most part of the rest of the world. And there was probably some more parts that are using not the metric system, but I think it's mostly the US that I know. And we
Yes,
already
and they will
jumped
never
right into it.
change. That's
Oh yeah, that's and they yeah exactly. Let's not go into these kind of things. But we already jumped right into some differences. I really like that. Now, Dave, before we jump into the questions, um, let's introduce yourself. What do you want people to know about you?
So my name's Dave West. Nice, easy name. So very handy. Particularly if you're in a restaurant and you're leaving your name, they can always spell it, or Starbucks when they write it on your on
They do
your.
write it correct for you, because I also heard that it's sometimes a joke that they do different names, so people, yeah. But for your name, they spell it
They
correct.
tend to. It's hard to sort of. Dave and West is probably the easiest name ever. So they do get it right usually, which is great. So yeah, so my name's Dave West. I'm based in the United States, but I'm British by birth. I was born in a little city called Leicester, or Leicester, as the Americans like to say. Um, and Leicester's famous in England for finding a king in a car park. They dug up a king, Richard III, and very famous last king to die in battle in the UK. They're also famous for a soccer team winning the Premier League when they were not the kind of team that normally wins the Premier League. And there's all sorts of backstory around that can be connected to agile, and we can talk about that maybe later. So that's where I'm from. Moved here about 25 years ago. I live in America, and I've had a few jobs here, but the one that I am now, I am the CEO of Scrum.org, which is the training certification organization, the home of Scrum, which was founded by Ken Schwaber, the co-creator of Scrum, and he's chairman of the board, sort of like the Frank Sinatra of of Agile and Scrum. So he's mostly retired now, but does helicopter in and cause some trouble, or maybe he's more like a seagull, steals your French fries and poops over your ideas. No, that's in a good way, in a positive learning way. But yeah, so he's my boss, and yeah, Scrum.org is it's quite an interesting organization. I joined it 10 years ago. Prior to that, I was at a startup called TaskTop that got bought by PlanView. Some of you may have read Project to Product by Mick Curson. He was the CEO. I was Chief Product Officer at TaskTop. So when I joined Scrum.org all those years ago, we were about 130 trainers, had about 100,000 people come to our website every month. Now we are 350 trainers with about 1.3, 1.4 million people come to the website every month. And that isn't because of me. I mean, I didn't muck it up, but I think it's more testament to the world has changed over those last 10 years. So anyway, so that's me, based here in Boston, Massachusetts.
Okay, thank you. That's a really nice introduction, and indeed, it's nice kind of tribute to Ken in a way, with everything that's going on at Scrum.org, I'd say. So that's nice to mention him there as well. I love the fact that how you say it, like semi-retired. That's I think these days in the agile world we have quite a lot of us who are like semi-retired, or like, okay, it's like maybe we can't retire, but well, I don't know how it is for Ken, but I know quite a lot of other people who say like, I still love that work. So from time to time, I don't want to be 100% busy, but from time to time, going to a conference or helping out or doing whatever that person then loves to do, there is actually quite a bunch of people, I would say, that keep doing that. So
Yeah, it's interesting. Ken now does not do that external stuff because he thinks, it's Scrum's 30 years old, and he says they should know it by now, right? But which is but he likes to get involved in the internal, like actually doing it, building things, deciding on products, make really thinking about how we can better execute in our mission, which is to help people and teams solve complex problems, and how we can better help people understand Scrum without him actually going and presenting Scrum. So he's more focused. So he'll appear at a sprint review. Obviously we use Scrum internally. He'll appear at a sprint review, which is awful for the team, not because he's not awesome and he's got lots to say, but because it scares the living bejeebies out of them still. And he'll ask really annoyingly insightful, incredible questions that will just, undermine us. So now we've got a sort of prep sheet that we do. What would Ken say? What would Ken ask? And we use that as a mechanism and to help us make sure that we're not just paying homage to him, but also staying on the straight and narrow. And I can definitely share some of those maybe later in the podcast.
I love this because that's also, I think, a good tip for any kind of coach at the moment that you leave a team. That it's actually, sometimes I've already given that advice to teams, that they say, okay, you just wonder, I'm no longer there, but what would I say? And I typically do that also, I would say, in my last weeks or last months, that I ask, okay, what do you think I would say, just to test them and to see, do they already feel what I would say. And in many cases, if the work is done, then they know what I would say. So I think that's a good coaching technique as an organization to use. Like, okay, what would Ken say? It's probably at a much bigger level or different level than what I would say. But,
I doubt it. It
yeah.
is, yeah. And I do think at some point AI is going to replace the need for even having that crib sheet. You can literally ask the AI to be Ken and to answer those questions. But yeah, it is a really useful technique because it sort of also makes it less about you, and sometimes those questions can be quite I don't know, negative, but could be perceived in a negative way. If you ask, well, who's the customer? Where's the value? How does this contribute to our mission? What are the measures for success? Those kind of things are the things that Ken says, right? And and it stops it from being a negative sort of conversation and an aggressive kind of set of questions, and makes it more like, haha, and we can all laugh about it, but ultimately we get to the answer. So it, as you said, it's a very useful technique, and it can take the emotion away, which is always great.
Yeah, and I can imagine, especially with someone like Ken, like, okay, he co-invented Scrum, and then at scrum.org, if he jumps in, I can imagine that many people like, oh, now it's at a different kind of level of stress that could bring. I want to bring on something else that you just talked about. This is the book that you talked about, if I'm correct.
Yes, that's a good friend of mine, Mick Kirsten, who was the CEO at TaskTop, and who I've known for quite some time. And I was the chief product officer until Ken persuaded me to come and run his organization. And I did review many manuscripts of that book. It's a fantastic book, particularly the start of it, the contextualization of, okay, so it's trying to answer a very simple question. Organizations often ask this simple question: how can we be like a software company? How can we be like a Google? How can we be like an Amazon? How we can be like a Tesla or whatever, a digital first company? And Mick asks that, and he uses the product metaphor to really explore that. Spends a lot of time at BMW and other companies exploring their production line and talking about how they manufacture product and manage variants and manage ownership and that, and that's what the book ultimately describes. And it's a really good book. He's actually writing I guess a sequel at the moment. I was chatting to him the other day about it. He's in that frustrated, excited phase in a book production.
Yeah, that the moment that you think, yes, it's there, but it's not there, and yeah, okay.
Exactly. It's when you've got too many ideas yeah, it's that kind of, how do I turn it into a book from a collection of amazing creative ideas? like from a conversation to a manuscript is a little bit of a challenge.
Exactly. Well, you could do what Ken Beck is doing these days instead of just one book, publishing a series of mini books. Then you can keep going, I think. Well, depending on how much time and energy he has, but that turns it into a different kind of thing if there is more ideas. Anyway, we already jumped into a lot of these things without that very first question. So let's go to that first question. What is something that people usually don't know about you, but has influenced you in who you are?
It was interesting when I read this question. Thank you for sending it. It helped me prepare a little bit, which I'm not sure is good or bad, but we'll see how it goes. There's many things I could say, but perhaps the most important one is dyslexic, I think. So I'm dyslexic. I couldn't read till I was 10. And this had a huge influence on who I am and how I approach the world. You can imagine, I was born in the 70s. I was born in 1970. I slipped into the 70s because February, so but I didn't, I'm never going to be a 60s baby, which is good.
And you were created in the 60s. You can
we don't like to mention that. Yeah. not in front of my mother, anyway. Anyway, she
right.
But yes, I probably was created at some sort of Beatles concert in the 60s or whatever. But anyway, so I was born in the 70s, and the 70s, dyslexia and things like that were not a common thing, and so not being able to read till I was 10 made it incredibly hard to participate in a the average comprehensive, right? And so it gave me some additional skills. For instance, how I manage complexity. I'm a very ordered, structured person because I couldn't rely on notes. I couldn't rely on those things to help me and to survive in a class of 35 kids in a relatively rough environment. I had to deal with this. Simplicity was crucial. I pay more attention, perhaps, than some other people, and it's hard to know whether that's connected to dyslexia or some other issue that I have, OCD or whatever. But the fact that you have to pay attention, you can't, instructions on the wall don't help. The fact that you're in the choir. I was in the choir until me and Aunt Arnold had a fight and I got thrown out. But which was
that's a different story.
That's a whole different story. But how can I be in a choir? I had to just pay attention and look at people's lips and and learn the song. So my memory was super crucial. And whereas my written language skills are still very weak, and I'm very visual. So when I looked at software development, which is how I came into this industry, like so many, it was all about visual structures. I think of the week as a series of boxes. I don't think of the week as a series of words. And I think it really has shaped me in the same way as it shaped people like Richard Branson or Einstein or all of these other. I mean, obviously they're the high profile sort of famous people, but the dyslexia is Jennifer Aniston is also dyslexic, by the way, and so I don't have any connection with her, but always like to mention her.
Just a little less famous than these people, right?
Yes, I'm a little less famous, but I think dyslexia is an interesting. I think it's a superpower. I actually do believe that it really, because it forces you to build other skills, because it forces you to build strategies. For instance, I have a really hard time with names because names are not logical, particularly foreign names.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And so I can't. Phonetics is the only way I can because I don't. It's really funny. Sounds don't mean the same things to me, So I think dyslexia shaped who I am and from an early age. And I was fortunate that I met a really great teacher when I was 9, and she basically took me under her wing and gave me tools that helped me read. So when I went to secondary school, though I was a long way behind everybody, and I really was. In fact, the first year of secondary school was horrendous. I at least could slowly catch up, and thanks to her, I survived in an education system that was not built to support people that were any different, whether they were dyslexic, dysgraphia, double deficit dyslexia, whether they had ADHD. It was a system that was actually would not like those people at all
No.
because there were problems. But I ended up surviving primarily because of this one teacher, and it led me. I think this foundation led me on the journey that I have that I'm on, I guess.
Yeah, and I really like that you say that you see it as a superpower, because indeed, well, I have a 20-year-old son who's dyslexic, and I recognize some of the stories that you're saying. Um, and well, he was able to read earlier than you, but still was a lot harder. Also had some troubles with his eyes, so at some point it wasn't really clear, is it now because of bad glasses or anything else? Um, but I recognize that it is a skill, because I've noticed when I look at him how he grew up, that he does pay attention to different things than different kind of people, and yeah, there is other things that he has, and like you say, now the research and everything is much better, and yeah, there is people who are much more aware. There still are teachers who don't care, who see it as a weakness. Unfortunately, that still stays. But luckily, there's a lot of others that do pay attention and that do see that, hey, it also brings some skills there. So yeah.
I think it's interesting you said. So the world is changing. AI and digital technology and the way in which knowledge work and work in general is done. And I think that unfortunately our education system is still built around the fact that they're training you to go and work in a factory or work in
Right.
a low level menial, relatively menial job, maybe go and work in a shop. I'm not dissing any of those jobs, they're all incredibly important. My mum worked in Sainsbury's for 30 odd years and did lots of amazing things from it. However, the education systems, you can now lean on very different things. Like Grammarly has fundamentally changed that I do how I write. Right, it's a tool that I use that's great because it's always there. The fact that a few years ago I used to before Grammarly I would read back, so I'd get the software to read back to me emails
Mm.
because I'm word blind. It's another trait, so I'd miss words, and because of that it would obviously change the whole sentence and surprise everybody, right? So things like that, and even though I could read the same sentence and it
And not
would
see
and
it.
I would not see it, which was just crazy at how your brain works, right? But I do think that the benefits of the modern technology, and I think we've got a huge advantage now potentially,
Yeah.
and I think that's not just true of dyslexia. I think it's true of all the diversity that we have in society, and the fact that education should be built around, I don't want to say exploiting that opportunity, but taking advantage of that opportunity. But yeah, it's an interesting world ahead. It's interesting to hear that your son is dyslexic. Both my children are, and they're fortunate that they go to a school called the Carroll School, which is in the New England area, and a system built around language-based learning disabilities, and seeing them thrive, seeing them find their passion, how to advocate, having strategies for dealing with things is just so amazing. I often do question what would I be like if I'd have gone through that system,
Mm.
because I do think some of my challenges shaped who I am. Some of those conflicts, some of that,
Mhm.
those really difficult moments, and they obviously have a different set of challenges because of that. So, but who knows?
Yeah, there was I wouldn't say a television series, but a small mini kind of documentaries on Belgian television, or even YouTube. I don't know what, it's a combination of these things, like many these days, and it was a person interviewing people with different kind of abilities, disabilities, depending on how you call it, and asking one of the main questions at the end was, would you trade your world? Would love to have grown up without HDAD, without being dyslexic? And most people said no. Most people at the end, and these were, yeah, I think, and most of the time they were teenagers. I think maximum 20 or something like that. And even at that age, they already said, no, I see value. And there was, of course, there was always one or two exceptions, but most of them really said, like, I actually, I know this is making my life harder, but it actually, I see some advantages. I look at the world in a different way. And yeah, I wouldn't want to not have my my challenges, and that, I think that's a really powerful message, because sometimes, well, as parents, I can imagine when you see your child growing up and you say, oh, they have this or that, that's like, oh, damn it. But actually, in the end, it will all works out, just like uh, Richard Branson, just like Einstein, Jennifer Aniston, like you. I think that's a really nice example of people that it didn't stop them, and it actually might have helped them in different kind of ways.
Yeah, I don't think language-based learning disabilities or any of those neurodiversity, and I'm not sure you consider that neurodiversity, but um, I don't think any of these things should be think of as disabilities. I think,
Mhm.
I think if you surround these people like me and like my children with support, love, and create an environment where they can thrive, then ultimately they become special powers, right? And I think, just to connect this to agility a little bit, is that ultimately is the responsibility of a scrum master, and the organization that agile team or teams live in. I mean, and that, and I think we got some questions later that really scratch at this a little bit more, but that is my passion. I think that if we can create environments that allow the potential of the individuals to fulfill their potential, to create that environment where people thrive, then the world will do amazing things. And at the heart of agility, and what particularly what Scrum created, with those first Scrum projects, whether it's Patient Keeper, whether it's Sentinel, whether it's the Fidelity example, it was actually getting the bureaucracy and the system away from the team and giving them the support to solve the problem that they needed to solve, or the problems. And I think that that's at the heart of it. And I think that dyslexia or all those other things are just part of this rich diversity that you bring into a team. And that isn't a hippie thing. It isn't me being
Mhm.
nice and kumbaya and holding hands. And the reason why I believe in supporting diversity is because it makes your product better. It makes the outcomes better. It makes your life more interesting. It isn't
Mhm.
because I'm a hippie and I want to hold hands with everybody and be kind. It isn't. I mean, I might want to do that anyway, but that isn't the reason why I care about diversity.
Yeah, and I like that you added to that, because I do, when I talked about some of the teachers that didn't want to help the children, or my child in particular, I don't get I did get some of these remarks like, yeah, but this is not about hippie style, and it's like, no, this is about seeing a child or a person as a complete human being with some problems and some challenges, but with extra things. And because of that, this child might see other things, might pay much more attention, like you did in school. And what's not to like as a teacher of a child that pays attention in class? I mean, that would, I think most people, teachers would love these children, but somehow they kind of miss a lot of that, because the other challenges that are there. So I really like that that way of looking at the world, I would say. And like, I love also how you added to the Scrum Master, because for me it's a conversation I sometimes have at customers, like, a Scrum Master is not a mother, the Scrum mom, like we say, that will yeah, will cherish, and again, nothing against mothers, but it's like sometimes you have to let a child learn things and experience the hard parts, but bringing the other parts, like, okay, what is the advantage of that, and not solving every problem in a way. And that in a sense, Scrum is
Where it
doing
makes
that.
sense. I mean, ultimately,
Exactly.
it a lot of people say that a coach should not have an agenda, right? Yeah,
Mm.
the Scrum Master does have an agenda. It's about delivering amazing, valuable products in the same way as everybody else in the team has that agenda. The Scrum Master and that accountability brings that perspective, that set of things to the team to help them work more effectively together to get to that outcome. Can a Scrum Master fire somebody? Yes, in my opinion, they can.
Mm.
They have that. If I mean, I'm hoping they won't have to, but they
Mm.
ultimately, if they see for the good of the team that they have to get rid of that amazing hero, for instance, or somebody that ultimately gets in the way of innovation and creativity, then it shouldn't be their first course of action, but it should be. So they come with an agenda, but exactly. And sometimes it means allowing the team to learn together. Sometimes it means telling them what to do. And every action that they have has a implication that they have to sort of manage a trade-off, right? But yeah, I think it's an interesting role or accountability. And I yeah, I mean, hopefully we'll get a chance to talk about this, Eve, because there's been obviously a big pushback against Scrum Masters and Agile coaches as times have got hard in organizations and
Hmm.
they've moved on to the next big thing, whatever that big thing is, or maybe they've just got fed up with change and change fatigue. And I worry that the opportunity that a role or an accountability like that has been forgotten and kicked to the wayside because of this and because of something else. But we'll get to talk about that, I'm sure, later in the
Yeah, I think
podcast.
because I already immediately have some ideas and extra questions, but let's move on to the next parts, and I'm pretty sure that at some of these things it will come back. So let's move to that second question. If you had not been doing what you've been doing now, do you have any idea what would have become of you?
Yeah, well, there's two ways of answering this, and I was thinking about that. The first one is, assuming who I am now, what would I become? And the other one is assuming that I had some other talents and skills. What I'd have become. If I could have been anything in the world, I'd be working on the West End or Broadway, being part of one of those amazing West End, whether it's Hamilton, whether it's Hades Town, whether it's Starlight Express, Cats, whatever that is. I would have. I think the ability to tell stories, to make people laugh and cry, to deliver emotion every day and get that response from an audience. So not become a film star, not become somebody that's famous, but somebody that's actually seeing the reaction of the audience every day and telling those stories. I think
Yeah, and
would is incredible.
I think this is why also sometimes big famous movie stars still want to do theater and all these kind of things because
Yeah.
of that reaction. It's I think this is very unique in a way that when you're on stage and bringing in a story that moves people and in all kind of emotions, I would say that getting a reaction, I can imagine that is that is something that will would be really nice to have, and I think many people would want that.
And
And did you have any kind of experiences when you were younger with
so I was in
such
the
a kind of
Leicestershire School of Dramatic Arts, yes, the
mm.
Leicestershire School of Theatre. And unfortunately, that experience led me to realize that you had to have talent, which was very disappointing, and that energy, passion, and a cheeky smile, unless you're Robbie Williams, does not take you very far. So I realized quite quickly, and I wasn't super attractive, and I wasn't, all those things. So because of that, I realized that that wasn't the journey that I was on, and so that led me to reassess where I'd be. So, so that
And
leads me
when you
to the
say
other.
reassess, at what age were you when you realized
I was
that?
probably about 15, 16. I mean, I was doing a vast variety of things. I was doing, the drama stuff. I was because I sort of befriended the science teacher that also managed the computer lab. So I was running that with Phil Smith, the teacher that owned that lab. I was really into computing and the like, and I was doing theatre as well. And I and then realized that my talent didn't really allow me to go much further. And so luckily, doing computing sort of and doing software development, that kind of took over then and became my sort of my vision for the future to escape. I want
And
to
does
say
that
escape poverty, but yeah.
yeah, I want to go maybe into that, but the question I had before was that was it more the realization that computer was you had more talent for this, or was it more the realization that you didn't have talent in the other?
So with respect to computing and software development and the work that many of us are in, you don't the difference in talent isn't as obvious. Hard work gets you further. With respect to the dramatic arts, and particularly singing and dancing, if you haven't got that talent, it is very, very hard. And
If you can't sing straight notes, or I mean
yeah,
that kind of
exactly. It is what it is, right? And
exactly.
the thing that's interesting is, yes, you could act, right? But
Hmm.
the thing that I realized is that most people that go that way either get very, very lucky very young, or they have the three. They can act, they can dance, and they can sing. They might be stronger in one of those, but ultimately, they have all three. It's incredible how many famous people can also sing. Anne Hathaway, for instance, she's an actress. Actually, she can sing brilliantly, and you're like, oh, that's interesting. Most of them can dance, and that was an interesting realization that as I got older, I realized, you go to auditions and, I'd get the fat kid or the fat Boy Scout because I was a little tubby then. And, I'd be part of the chorus or whatever. Because there was a different set of objectives when you're that young in amateur dramatics, and I think that's when I realized that this wasn't going to be my career, and I had to, because I came from a one parent family. I was brought up by my grandparents. I lived in a council house in just outside Leicester. We didn't have any money, so I needed to have a career. I needed to be able to, I don't want to say
Support
escape
yourself.
Leicester. It's a great place and I love it to bits, but I needed to escape my circumstance. And the only way I could do that effectively, or the only position that I thought that I could take, was computing and software. And remember, this is, 86, 85. Computers weren't widespread. They were new.
Hmm.
And my grandma helped me buy a BBC Model B computer, and it just changed my life. I could do, and Phil Smith from Computer Club lent me all sorts of weird things like robots and printers,
Wow.
and I used the first mouse then, and it was awful. And I was like, why would anybody use a mouse? You can just type in a command line. It's so much easier. Um, it's just I got my great uncle taught me, Lisp and Fortran and COBOL, and it opened up this whole world that I knew I could make a living, and I could have a nice house and a nice life, and maybe help my family out, and whereas I knew that if I was going to be an actor, they'd be doing the more of the helping than I would be helping them, unless I got very lucky, which could have happened, but it's very unlikely, right?
That's but thanks for bringing that, because it's an extra thing I would say about about how how your life could have been different indeed with again, if you're grown up with a single parent, being raised particularly by grandparents, because I assume that that single parent had to work a lot to make sure that you could survive, or that that family of origin could survive. That brings a whole different kind of looking at work, I would say. Then it basically is okay. Whatever I do, I can't fool around for a couple of years. Whatever I do, I need to support myself, and maybe support your family then later on. But that is something that has a huge impact, and I can imagine that it helps you. Well, I would say not feeling too much sorry for yourself that you can't act. It's like, okay, let's move to that next thing, what I can do.
And also that if anybody's seen one of my presentations, I'm fortunate that I get the opportunity to present all around the world, right? Because I'm the CEO of Scrum.org. I've written a few books and all that malarkey, right? And the great thing is I get that opportunity and that learning of drama and understanding timing and appreciating the audience and has really helped me. It certainly helped my confidence. And with the dyslexia, learning a script was incredibly hard and took a lot. So improvisation became really important. The ability, learning to pause, and all of these have been great skills. I was trying to persuade my eldest to do. There's a drama thing at his school, and he's like, "No way, Dad! Why would I want to get up on the stage and be ridiculed by the eighth graders?" And I was like, "Yeah, yeah." It was very. He said no ultimately, but I was like, "This is an incredibly useful skill." He's like, "No, no." Yeah. So I guess it's
We
not for
at that
everybody.
kind of age, we don't know what is the skill that we need. That is
No, and
that's
we also
yeah
don't believe our parents have got
yeah
any idea, which is fair, and I understand that. But
yeah.
I was lucky that my grandma, who I spent an awful lot of time with, was very, very supportive and confidence boosting. There's definitely when you can't read at school, people are calling you retarded and all sorts of horrible words that you would never use nowadays. And you would go home and your gran would be like, "You're the greatest, you're amazing, don't believe a word of what they say, David." And I think that's important, particularly when you have a little bit of confidence issues, and that opened up all sorts of opportunities to me.
But did that also help you? I can imagine that if they already said a lot of nasty words to you for something that is not true and true at the same time, in a way that okay, your dyslexia has nothing to do with who you are as a person, but you get called all these nasty names, then I can imagine that going on stage is less frightening to you because you know what, they already call you nasty names. So is that a
I,
correct statement or?
maybe I've never really thought of that before. I think that the combination of knowing that whatever you do, your your grandmother is going to be there for you and has got your back.
Mhm.
Having that foundation, I think ultimately helped. I think combined with the fact that I had some good friends who didn't say those things and I knew that they would be there, whatever. And then, yeah, maybe the other thing about dyslexia, you, I had to be the funny one because I couldn't necessarily, you had to think on your feet. You had to be that. So I think that all combined. Um, yeah, but it is. I mean, what makes us? Who the heck knows? It's such a complicated
True.
thing.
But it's interesting to think about it as that, and like you said, other things might shape you, and of course, definitely, someone that supports you in all kind of ways really helps for a confidence boost. I think if I think people who don't have that, yeah, I think that's probably worse than almost anything else that you can have if you don't have people supporting you. that you believe, and it could
Yes,
give that counterbalance to the, like I said, the other people, that whatever you do, they will call nasty names. Well, you might as well just do something that you like, because they were going to call you out anyway. So yeah, I think
exactly. To
that's
quote Taylor Swift, haters will hate.
exactly. Mhm. All right. I really like that. Let's move to that next question already. What you consider your biggest challenge, at least the biggest one that you want to be out open on the internet, of course, and why is that a good thing for you?
It's yeah. This was a hard question to answer. I'm not going to lie, and that's, some would instantly think because you're arrogant. Yeah, maybe. And that might be a fundamental challenge. I'm too arrogant. I don't know. I used to be conceited, but now I'm perfect. Yeah, to quote a joke. But I think my biggest challenge is really around, I talk too much and don't listen enough.
Mm.
I think that and it's probably connected to the fact that I want people to like me. I want to feel that I'm always in a positive environment. I want, that sort of ultimate, like, I don't want to say love, but that, like everything's always positive. Oh gosh, I just had a meeting with Dave. That's incredibly positive. And I think that when people don't say anything, or when there's quiet moments, or when I've not got the answers, or I'm not leading it, then ultimately that's a reflection on me. I don't know, but why? But I do talk too much and I don't listen enough. And my gran, God bless her, Lillian Carter, rock star that she was, possibly a Buddhist, don't know. She didn't practice, she was Church of England, but she had some of those sort of like Buddha, Siddhara kind of characteristics, which is really, when I used to get home from school, she'd say some really interesting things. But one thing she'd say when I was talking too much after getting home from school was, David, God gave you two ears and one mouth. And I'd say, yes, Gran. She'd go, well, why can't you use them in that ratio? And I'll be like, okay, Gran. And two ears and one mouth. And I think that, wanting to be the life and soul of the party, wanting to make people feel good, wanting to be the smart one, even if I'm not the smart one. And I think that is the biggest challenge. Saying that, though, it also is the reason why probably I'm the CEO of Scrum.org, and why I'm living where I am in the life that I'm living, because people remember me, people
Mm.
see me, people hear me. And I do appreciate that I'm missing lots because I'm not asking enough questions. I'm not allowing that space to occur, to allow people that are less buoyant or boisterous or talkative to say those words. So I understand the implications of but ultimately, I also think that a lot of good can come out of being that life and soul by talking a lot, etc. I mean, maybe I wouldn't be on this podcast if I wasn't a chatty person.
Well, it's interesting because we have lots of people who say that they don't talk as much, and yeah, are also here. But it's true, we're only at the third question, and we're already talking for a very long time. In that sense, it is true. Um, the but what is that good thing about that for you? Because that was the second part of that question.
Well,
Is
the
there
good the good
anything good?
thing I think is it's people remember me. People
Right.
want me to be at their event, at their party, at their meeting, at their stuff. People say, "Oh, hey, Dave." The bad thing is that I miss out on learning so much. How can you balance these two things? I also think, to some extent, my relationships can be a little superficial. God, this has got very deep. And gosh, talk about turn left on the journey when you're expecting to go right. But I'm thinking about this a lot recently. As you get older, I'm 55, right? And as you get older, it becomes harder to build friendships. Honestly, it really does. And I think to some extent, it's because of the way in which I'm, boombastic. I go in and people are like, well, hang on a minute. I don't need that now. I don't need all that noise. I need something else. And I think that the connections are less deep and more superficial, maybe because of that. So that's a bad thing.
Right. But the people do remember you and might be getting contact, and so that's that
So that's the good thing.
counterbalance.
And it's
Yeah,
certainly
exactly.
good from a business point of view. I mean, Ken and I met 20 something years ago, Ken Schwaber, co-creator, and he told me I was an idiot. And the only reason why he told me I was an idiot was because, I was talking and I had an opinion about something. He was right, by the way, just for reference. And he came up to me, and it was because, I was the chatty guy, right? Chatty Dave. And so because of that, it led me on this journey, and he became my mentor for 20 years and 20 plus years. And it's been incredibly valuable because of that. So, however, I do think it would be nice to listen more. I think I miss out. Like, so for instance, when you're talking, Eve, and I do catch myself as I'm doing this, I'm formulating what I'm going to say next rather than thinking about what you're saying. And I catch myself, so I try not to do that, but my natural position is always to be that.
Right. But it's like you said, well, that's I think the good thing, and probably has to do also a little bit with your age and being much wiser. That okay, you
Oh,
understand yourself now much better, and you catch yourself, because catching yourself is the first thing. If you don't know it, the first thing is knowing it, and then catching yourself, and then hopefully catching yourself before you do it, and preferable then later not doing it anymore. But it's already on the path of knowing it. I think, and being much better at that. So I think this is the good thing. Also, the fact that you can bring it up and talk here openly about it. That for me is one of these nice things where we can learn from each other, because you're definitely not the only one who has this skill, I would say.
oh, yes, let's call it a skill. And
Let's move to that second that next question. What drives you? Because with everything you just said, you're passionate. You talk but that's for me also kind of a drive and a kind of a passion. Do you know where that drive and that passion is coming from?
yeah, again, deep sort of. I think I think there's two levels. I know what my personal passion is now, and I know what really interests me and motivates me, and that is ultimately, I touched on it earlier. I look at the world and I look at the potential of the human beings in it, and I despair of the environment that we've created for them to fulfill their potential and to deliver on their dreams, and to help the world get better. And my mum worked in Sainsbury's, the supermarket, awesome supermarket. She loved it. So I'm not dissing Sainsbury's if anybody is listening to this and works there. It's an awesome company, and I really she really loved her time there. But there was so many times during her time there where she could have helped the store that she worked in become better for its staff, better for its customers, better for the environment, better for lots of, however you measure better. And she was never able to do that, either because she did not feel empowered to do it, or there was no mechanisms inside the organization for her to do it. She worked on the cigarette counter, and they delivered the cigarettes at the same time that everybody was getting their lottery tickets every week. cigarettes are an incredibly valuable thing. You do not leave boxes of them sitting there. You need to put them away, which meant that there was definitely less people on the counter, which basically meant there was a big line of, these lottery ticket, and who knows, one of those lottery ticket people could have made, 100 million, whatever, pounds or whatever, and built a charity in Leicester, and who knows what could have happened if only they had just delivered the cigarettes at a different time. And she knew that. And and that's just one example, a very obvious example, but I think that everybody is in situations like that. And I would love to build a world where feedback and contribution is not only encouraged but is enabled. And I feel that that is not the world that we live in today. And it's even when you get in an Uber and they do something that really annoys you, and then you get this feedback, you always give them 5. Why? Because you know that the contribution, if you give them a 3 or a 4, it's going to affect their livelihood, maybe, because the algorithm will prioritize somebody that's a 5, above them. So you don't want to do that, but you have some practical advice that you want to provide to the person, like, hey, please don't play your rap music or whatever, Christian country, reggae, whatever the music is. I'm not dissing any of those genres. They're all awesome. Please don't play it as loud, or maybe you need to tone down the aftershave or put some aftershave on. You want to give that feedback, but there isn't a mechanism to do that doesn't have a negative impact potentially on them as a human being in that Uber example. How do you give feedback? I was at the dentist, and the dentist sends me an email after every dental visit. We'd love your feedback. And I gave some feedback that was a little bit negative, not going to lie, about the retainer that I was, because when you move to America, part of becoming an American, you have to have perfect teeth. So you go through this whole process. I think Trump is going to make it, legal. You have to do it. Or is that just English language and lorry truck drivers? I can't remember. Anyway, one of those two. Anyway, so I gave some feedback, and she was so angry. I'm no longer, I mean, she's not my dentist. She moved me to a different person in the practice. And I'm like,
But they asked for it, the
but
feedback.
you asked for this feedback. But that's not the point. The point, the system, and by the way, I'm not blaming her. She knows that she wants feedback, but she also probably works her boss or is reviewing it, and she knows that it's going to have a negative impact on her review. So why would she want that feedback? And feedback's just one mechanism, but the point is we need to create an environment where we're all getting better, where we empower people to contribute more effectively, where we encourage feedback and it doesn't hurt people. That we need to, if we do that, we could get so much better. There's so many obvious things inside organizations, inside how we work. We've got so much opportunity, and it's constrained, and it's so constrained, and we constrain it ourselves by our ridiculous, human characteristics of status, power, authority, embarrassment, all of this stuff as well. I mean, it's not just the organizations that are at fault, or even the systems they exist within. It's much broader than that, but it is just so annoying. So anyway, so I want to fix that. Now, I appreciate that I can't fix it completely, but every day, as we help people understand what professional Scrum is, or the ideas of agility, or, even empowered teams, or autonomy, mastery, purpose, the Dan Pink stuff, if we can help people get that, then we can slowly peel back this onion and help people just do stuff a little bit better and work in an environment that's a little bit more supportive. That's what drives me.
I like that, and that's I think I like that as a drive, and I think many people in the agile world would have something very similar. That and yeah, the fact that your example, it would drive me crazy if you don't want to, if you can't handle the feedback, then don't ask the feedback. I mean, that's the, of course I don't know how you wrote it, but I can imagine that you're still, yeah, they ask for feedback, you try to give it in a constructive way, even if it's hurtful, or even if it's, yeah, if it's if there is something negative about it. If people ask for feedback, that's yeah, they should be able to handle it. Otherwise, you don't ask that, which is sad, but much better than asking and then not being able to handle it.
But
That's
it's not her fault though.
yeah, I
And
agree.
and
I
and
agree.
this is the thing. I'm not judging her as a human being, or even the system. You know, that I agree with your point about, if you don't want feedback, don't ask for it. But the point is that she thinks she wants feedback. The system is built around feedback, but the way in which the impact of that feedback, or how she perceives the impact of that feedback, is ultimately is negative, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's the problem. And I myself, yeah, I do quite a lot of writing and the like, right? And you get that feedback, and you have to control those emotions, because when you read something, you know, you've put a lot of effort into it, and somebody goes, this is just stupid, or, and I appreciate, yes, it's how you frame the feedback back, but they may not even, they may say it quite nicely, but how you interpret it is very different. It is how you, and it's that we've built this whole system around perfection, and the, you know, the definition of yourself is defined by how you perceive others' perception of you and all that. And I'm not a psychiatrist, and you know, there's a lot of people, or a psychologist, or an anthropologist, or whatever. There's a lot of people that are much smarter than me around this. But what I do observe is that, you know, we need to build an environment where that feedback is actually constructive, and we need to help people manage that, but and then empower them to drive for that. Like, we need to have, at that Sainsbury's example, we need to have built an environment at that store where they're continuously polling people to get ideas to improve, and then empowering those people to fix the problems, and then rewarding them on that.
It what you said about feedback reminds me of another book that I don't know if you know that. That's
Oh yeah, I
Thanks for
haven't
the
read it.
feedback.
It's on my list. It
It's yeah, it's one of the best books I've read about. I've read a lot about feedback, but this one, for the people that don't know you, is the only one that I know that's written for the people receiving the feedback. Most books about feedback are written for giving feedback.
yeah.
And what I like so much, what I've learned, one of the things I've learned from this book is that it makes the point that many people that want feedback, they want either there's three different possibilities. Either they want appreciation, they want coaching, or they want evaluation. And what I've learned is that, and that's not in the book, but that's something that I've seen, is that if people say we want feedback and they mean appreciation, when you give them some coaching and some tips to improve or whatever, they feel it as evaluation. They feel it really like, oh, you're just telling me I'm bad and I'm not perfect and whatever. And they when I've been into conversations with some of these people, that they really say, yeah, but I wanted feedback and you haven't given me feedback. What they mean is, you haven't given me the appreciation. I was asking for feedback, and basically I want you to tell me how good I am. And when I've noticed that when we make much more the difference, and of course you can't do that with a dentist in an email or whatever form we have it the digital way. But when I'm working with people in teams, I do make them sure that they understand the difference. Like, okay, because as a scrum master, as a coach, or even as a manager, um, I will be doing a lot of coaching. I will also do appreciation, and I know that I'm not that good in evaluation. because I personally don't care about evaluation, and that's something I've learned from that book as well. That there are other people that for who it's important, and of course, in a work environment, I already knew that was important. But that's something I've learned, that it's interesting to see these differences, and yeah, and to understand, like, okay, when you ask for feedback, which is the one that you want, because
It,
otherwise
it is
we make mistakes.
interesting that you said about the affirmation or the positive stuff. So I'm doing a LinkedIn learning class at the moment. I did one called uh, Introduction to Professional Scrum on the LinkedIn platform a while ago, and I taught. And it's interesting because we had a conversation, me and the editor, right up front about how I like to receive feedback. And I said, look,
Mm,
number one thing is I want to feel that I'm not stupid and that there's some positive. So let's start with that always. Then let's move through things that could be improved and the why. Always put the why, because
mhm,
ultimately just telling me something like change this is great, but change this because of is because then that's a learning opportunity and we can build that, and I think this is this dyslexia thing again. We can build that structure, that process, that formula, and I can learn from it. And we spent a lot of time at the start talking about how I received feedback, and I coached the editor how I need, it's because it's all about me. Yes, in the case of
mhm.
editing your document, it is. And so
Exactly.
I was trying to help them, and it really improved my perception of the editor, my relationship with the editor, and also I think ultimately led to a pretty good, a pretty awesome class. Well, about
But
900 people every month listen to it. So yeah.
so that's not bad. But I do indeed think that that is partially what's done, written in the book. Like, okay, make sure that when you ask for feedback, that you clarify what you need, what you want, and understand that. And since I know that as a feedback giver, I will also pay attention to these kind of things. I want to move to that next question because we're already talking for about an hour and we're not yet halfway.
Oh
So
gosh, really?
let's
Wow, this
yes.
has been
But
awesome.
like I said earlier, or when we were in the pre-chat, it's very easy to go with this. So let's move to that next question. What do you consider your biggest achievement? And maybe before that question, what I've noticed in the podcast is that basically this is your moment to brag and to be really proud. Is that easy for you, Dave, to brag?
I don't know. Probably, but I maybe I don't know. I mean, I think that's for you to determine, really. After I've so there's I would be wrong not to lead with kids, marriage, and family. And people say, well, it's easy to say that, right? Well, each of those has a particular challenge. The kids, we went through IVF, and that was incredibly challenging. More challenging for my wife. She was amazing, and I would have not managed to do it anywhere near as well as she did. But that was, I'm very pleased that we managed to go through that, and we have two amazing boys who are a little annoying actually at the moment, but in general they're amazing. And marriage, is, I think, hard. I think anybody. I think I'm proud that I've managed to build a pretty robust and good marriage, and a family that I'm very proud of. So I think, lead with that. And everybody's going, well, of course you are. That's exactly what you would said. But I didn't necessarily have any role models for those things growing up, and I think I'm very proud of those. Professionally, though, I'm proud of two things. I'm proud of my contribution at TaskTop. We built a business. We flipped a service-based business to a product business, which ultimately got bought by PlanView. And I'm proud of the team that we built and the success that created. I also, the experience was one of the most rewarding ones, those scary ones. Literally, I was over just before the Christmas vacation. What was it? I guess 15, 14 years ago, I was in the UK trying to make sure we closed the deal, because otherwise we wouldn't have made payroll. Those
Wow.
moments were horrible, but also the most rewarding. I'm very proud of TaskTop, and though it wasn't, I was a very small component to that. The rest of the team ultimately took it over the line and did an incredible job there. I'm very proud of that. I'm also proud of Scrum.org, but I'm not just proud of the growth of Scrum.org over the last 10 years. I'm proud of the kindness that the Scrum.org community shows generally. And I believe that kindness is super, super important. We have a trainer, a Canadian trainer, so kindness is part of their DNA, right? Called Steve Porter, and he uses a phrase that really, he didn't invent the phrase, but he used it a lot, and he introduced me to it. I don't believe in the golden rule, with the golden rule being do unto others as you want to be done unto yourself. I believe in the platinum rule, do unto others as they need to be done unto, So take it up to that next level. And that requires you to have empathy, which I know that isn't in vogue at the moment in the US, but empathy is super important. It requires you to pay attention. It requires you to bring curiosity. It requires you to step in other people's shoes and think about how your words, actions, deeds land. And I think that the Scrum.org community, the professional Scrum trainers and the people that are connected to that community have really demonstrated that. And there are so many people in the Agile community. You see them on LinkedIn or and by the way, we're not perfect and we still make mistakes, but generally, when a professional Scrum trainer or a member of our community says something on a blog post or on a LinkedIn discussion or whatever, it's positive, it's kind, it listens, it tries to. Doesn't come tries not to be arrogant. It often can be confident, but that's different. So kindness, I think we've done a really good job creating kindness, and I think kindness is something that we all should do more of in the world.
I like that. I also want to go back to the platinum rule, and especially because I've seen so many people. Well, the example of the golden rules for me is when people come to you and they give you a gift. So, for example, you invite them to your house and they bring you some gift, and it's. I don't drink any wine, for example, and it's amazing how many times I get people bringing me bottles of wine because they like to drink wine, and that's fine if we can drink them that same evening. That's perfectly. But if it's just as a gift to say, okay, for whatever, that's like, no, then yeah, but I give what I want to give. Yeah, but that's I don't like that. I mean, give what people want to expect, and because otherwise I might have to throw away expensive wine because I don't have any place anymore for wine. It's like that. Then it's stupid. Then it's not good for me, and probably not for you either. You will. So that's really nice. Yeah. I'd never heard about the platinum rule. I heard about the golden rule, but I like that platinum rule. It's really like, yeah.
And by the way, this might not be the official platinum rule. There might be another platinum rule, but Steve Porter uses it all the time, and I'm not necessarily always good at it, but I do try to strive for it. It's a bit like the listening thing, right? And I guess they're all kind of connected. But if you can just be kind, and kind doesn't always mean being nice, by the way. Kind is being aware of how your actions are going to be perceived by the other person and taking that into account. And and I think that empathy is such an important characteristic because it also means that you grow as a human being. I think thinking about how your actions are received, I think is super important, and I see too little of it particularly in the US at the moment. And I don't,
Yeah.
I don't wish to be political in this but this isn't about politics. This is about humanity, and I see that at the moment in particular, this is who I am, and I'm going to tell you who I am. And if you don't agree with me, well, tough. And how hurtful that can be, and how disruptive and how destructive, because it closes down dialogue and communication, and it stops us learning. Both sides, actually, to be honest, not and I think there's so much opportunity to learn and to grow that we don't. And I'm guilty of it. I am very guilty of it now. And I find people that have come with a particular perspective and that I'd completely disagree with, that I find myself sometimes, instead of being curious, instead of trying to understand why they're coming at this way, and then sharing in a constructive way what I'm thinking about something, I tend to just shut down and just, win the argument, which adds no value to anybody.
Yeah, yeah, the whole empathy thing. I think it's incredible how people somehow in the US seem to spin that whole idea that empathy is weakness. I'm like, yeah, this is, yeah, I just can't understand it. That as if caring about other people is negative. Yeah, this is just, and then it very quickly turns into a political game, left and right and whatever what you have. And like, for me, caring about people isn't about right or left. It's about, yeah, it's about being a decent human being,
But
and
it's
somehow that turns into politics these
also,
days.
empathy is selfish as well, which is ultimately maybe it's good for you, because if you're empathic, that means that you can learn some stuff. And if you learn some stuff, it means you can very at least sell things more effectively, build things that people will want to use, write songs that people will want to sing and listen to. Empathy ultimately is an incredibly powerful skill to be more effective as an individual. And excuse me, I know that I think to some extent it's not a moral thing. I think morality is a whole different thing, which is which is definitely a worthier conversation, but not. This isn't about morality. This is about practical skills to make you more successful in this thing called life, in this game called life, right? An infinite game, maybe. It's to quote Simon Sinek, but to be more effective, I think, is to be empathic, and I know that sort of is contrary to the dogma that is becoming a lot more popular at the moment. And I think that maybe it's darkest before the dawn. Maybe that's the journey we were on, and because of that, there's this massive backlash. Maybe we've been positioning it wrong. Maybe it's a marketing thing around why woke needs to be got rid of, and it's positioning. And but it makes you more successful. If you want to sell more Teslas, you need to empathize with the people that are going to be buying Teslas, right? It's as simple as that. And get over yourself, Elon. It's not about who's smart, who's right, who's wrong. It's about selling more stuff. Be empathic.
Exactly. That's the that's the even more craziest part of that. But okay, let's move on, because I still have, about half. We're halfway now, so let's move to that next question. Do you have a personal agility tip to share?
I think discipline. I think that and that's not dressing up in leather at the weekend, by the way, if anybody's like thinking. There was nothing wrong with that, and that can definitely help your agility as well. But the discipline, a lot of people think of agile as a very, sort of like chaotic sort of environment. Ultimately, discipline, I think, is incredibly important. And updating your Trello board or whatever board you have, or keeping notes on meetings, which is now very easy with AI. Though I'm a little bit morally confused at the moment about recording all meetings and transcribing them using AI and then storing them on my machine. I'm like, uh, is that like an invasion of privacy? And even though you ask them and they say it's fine, it still feels somehow a little bit dirty. But that's another separate conversation. But this disciplined approach, um, and I think that it's very underrated. And I'm not just talking about the discipline of definition of done, and using a Kanban board and having each lane as two, to demonstrate invisible cues, or the discipline of testing, or test first, or TDD, BDD, whatever. I mean, those things are obviously really important. I'm talking about personal discipline, about how you show up, how you prepare for a meeting, how how you're on time, those things are super important. Now, I'm not saying, again, you're not going to be perfect, but holding that level of discipline, I think, is the thing that separates successful agile teams from ones that aren't.
So you talked about discipline. Let's take it from there again. Let's.
Oh, do you want me to start from the beginning
No,
of
no,
the
where you were, and then where you are.
So I think that discipline ultimately is something that is underrated, and something that's super important, I think, as a personal discipline. And you need to bring that discipline to your agile teams.
Right. Um, yeah, I think, and it reminds me, it brings back the circle to what you said earlier on about, yeah, being dyslexic and having to be attention, and I think there's a lot there that you've learned, that discipline, being young, being attentive to school and other things, I guess. Or am I seeing things that you
No,
that
I think
disagree
it's
with?
all part of that. I mean, the fact that so we just recently went on a family vacation, and we went to the UK because once a year I try to make sure my kids spend a week in the UK to remember who they are, though they're both born in America and both American,
Hmm.
really. But so it's a fruitless task. They just moan about the lack of ice in drinks, and the fact that the portion sizes are so weird. But anyway, so so how I pack is very disciplined. How I approach, when I get to the hotel, or we stayed in an Airbnb, and I I put things in the away, and I make sure things are in the same place. I always store things in that kind of stuff. Whereas my wife, God love her, she's amazing. I mean, she fills a room with energy and passion, but she is not that, and it's just chaos. And I find that incredibly tiring, because I have to remember where things are. I have to Now I can use notes and the like, but it's really hard to do that. And so discipline, I think, is it personal discipline is incredibly powerful. It's an incredibly powerful tool. And when you're looking at agility, which is the ability ultimately to respond in a more effective way to an ever-changing environment around you, to be agile, as it were, that if you've got that complexity removed from your problem space, then it frees up some cognitive load, the team topologies kind of idea, cognitive load to put on other things, to respond to your environment, to show up with curiosity, to do all those sort of things. Removing complexity. And to be fair, that's what Ken, when he said, okay, daily scrum happens the same time every day. Of course, it doesn't have to. The reason why it does is it frees you up from spending that 20 minutes at the end of the meeting agreeing or arguing with everybody to determine when that daily scrum's going to be. Can we do it at 4? No, I can't do it at 4. I've got to take kids to school. Okay. Can we do it at 3:30? Yeah, I can do it at 3. I can't do it. How much energy does that waste?
Exactly, the fact that you can do that once, that having that discussion, and you can change it occasionally when there's things, but it makes things so much easier. Like you say, if it's always at the same time, then everybody knows. You can keep your calendar free. You don't have to. Yeah, You can work your day if you want to start early, want to start late, whatever. You can plan around that, and that brings so much value, I think.
Yeah.
And that discipline. It's the same thing about. Do we? I had this discussion this week with at the current company I'm working with. We a lot of meetings start late, and then of course if the first meeting starts 5 minutes late, then the next one will go over, and so this one will go over, then the next will be late, and before you know it, at the end of the day, you almost start half an hour late. I'm exaggerating now a bit, of course, but yeah, it's so much easier just start on time. If you're not there, well, okay, we'll start the meeting, and then probably next time, hopefully, you will pay more attention and will be more on time. That's that discipline. Yeah, I think that is something that is valuable indeed. Let's move to that next question about remote work. What have you learned about remote work? And maybe the question typically before is, when did you start doing remote work? Was that during the pandemic, like so many others, or did you do
No,
remote
a
work
long
before?
time before that. We started actually in 2003, I think it was. Not full-time remote, but often remote. So I was working for Rational Software, and IBM bought them and instantly started closing offices. And the office they wanted us to go to was like 2 hours from Boston. It was ridiculous. Well, initially it was Cambridge, and that was fine. And then they closed that or reduced that. And so it was hot desking. And so guess what? We started working, and this was before Zoom, before all of these great, a mural, and before this really great technology that we have today. It was conference, you'd have a conference line, you'd use a Polycon, I started really then, and I've been in and out of the office since then. So what's that? 20 years, over 20 years, hot and cold, of doing that. When I went to Forrester Research, we were in the office. However, we were allowed to be at home a couple of days a week, so we did. So I've been doing it for quite some time, and part of me loves it. It gives me a level of flexibility. It allows me to be here for my kids when they need it. Occasionally I get to see my wife as she just walked by then, and that's always a pleasure. I get to take the dog out occasionally, which is lovely. Get the washing done, all of that kind of stuff. It also allows you to focus. I think there's all the data that demonstrates that, the fact that you get to focus. The problems with it though are significant, and I don't work at home. I am at home at work. You know
Mm.
the distinction, that I'm always available, that I'm always on, that you don't have that separation. I really miss the commute on some days because it gave me my
Mm.
time to listen to music, to listen to a podcast, to phone a friend, those things. I also miss the serendipity of working with people. The fact that you would just bump into somebody and you would say, "Hey, what are you up to?" or whatever. I miss that. I miss
Mm.
human beings. And it doesn't matter. As much as you try to duplicate it, you can't. Um, so what I've really learned about remote work recently, and it's over the last year or so, I feel that I, I don't think you should only work remotely. I actually
Mm.
don't. And I think that if I'd have worked remotely from, my early 20s, I would not be who I am now. I think you have to have a mix. I think that the balance, I think, is important. And I do appreciate that, particularly working mums, working dads, remote work can be incredibly powerful to allow you to actually have a career whilst also being there for your family. I also appreciate carbon footprint. I also appreciate all those things. So I understand the value of remote work and the power of it and the productivity of it. But I think that I wonder if the world would be a better place if the pandemic, well, I know the world would be a better place if the pandemic hadn't happened. There's millions of people that unfortunately passed because of it. But ignoring that bit, if you can, for a minute, if we hadn't all suddenly jumped remote, would we be as, I don't want to say as polarized as we are? Because one thing that's forced at work is you have to talk to people you don't like.
Yes.
I mean, you do. You just
That's
do. You have
true.
to get them coffee sometimes. Can you believe it?
Exactly, yeah.
You have to go for lunch with them and they come and sit at your table. Whereas if you're in a remote setting, unless you're working with somebody, and even if you're working with somebody on a project or a product, you can minimize the amount of interactions you have with that person. And I think that spending time with people you don't like is an incredibly powerful skill.
I really like that you the stressing out the fact that indeed physically you have to work with people you don't like, and that is again a good thing in a way. You learn it. You well, there is always value in, well, not always, but in many cases there is value with working with people that you learn some different things. We talked about diversity. That's also a different kind of diversity. Of course, we're still talking about decent people. That I'm not talking about people that
Psychopaths
are
and the like.
psychopaths and these kind of things. But in general, even if we we might dislike people for multiple kind of reasons, and then it still is good. So I like that you stress that. And like you say, there might be options remote to randomize people you chat with and whatever, but that still is a lot of different than walking to a coffee machine and bumping into a person. That
Yeah,
still
and
is
hearing somebody else have a conversation, and appreciating people. So you get on a Zoom call or Teams or whatever technology you're using, Hangouts or whatever, and you build a picture of that human being based on those interactions. If you were sitting in a cube or in an office and you heard that person maybe talking to their kids or or talking to their friends, you would build a very different perspective of that person. And as much as we try to put our biases, put them aside when we're working with people, of course they come in, and the reality is, I think we're losing a lot. I also do appreciate that the benefits of remote working are massive. So I really think hybrid is the way to go. If I
hybrid
was
as in from time to time, remote from time to time at the office, not
exactly,
hybrid
and
in
maybe there's a
having
routing.
people.
Oh yeah, not yeah, yeah. Sorry, yes, exactly.
No, just to make sure I understand
Yeah,
what
I
kind of
mean
hybrid you mean.
mixed mode, where we go into the office. So we have an office here just outside Boston in a place called Burlington. It was actually bizarrely where the first ever Scrum project was. Same place. We weren't there forever. We moved back to this particular building. I want to put a plaque. They don't, but the owners of the building say that they're not willing to put a plaque. And I'm like, I'll buy the plaque. They're like, we don't want you to put it up. They're like, well, I'm like, why not? But anyway, that's another
A whole different
story.
story.
And we have this lovely office, and nobody comes in. And yes, a lot of the team aren't in the Burlington, Boston area. Over time, we've kind of like changed the dynamic. We've hired people that have that would contribute the most to the organization, and they are wherever they are, right? And some people have, during the pandemic, a few people moved away to be close to their families again, and their parents who are getting older, etc. So because of that, there isn't many people in this area, but even the people that are literally 10 minutes away, they don't want to go into the office. And I don't want to force people, I think that sort of defeats the whole object. But I do think there'd be some benefit of once in a while all getting together in the office. And but anyway, so that's what I've learned. I guess I've learned that I personally would love to go into an office more and to be surrounded by human beings more.
Mm. I do like that you stress out also that you get to know a little bit about the children, because also, even if we're having a lunch conversation, we might talk a little bit about that. The opposite is also true. The fact that when people are working from home, we might actually see
Totally true.
the people, which we typically don't see these days anymore. Well, especially with the clean offices systems that, the clean desk, nobody has still has pictures on their desk, on their computers or whatever. So yeah.
Yeah. So what's interesting though, Eve, I just want to pull on that for a second. During the pandemic, we were really into that, like sharing families, bringing people in, saying hello, because we were all trapped, right, in our homes and the like. And we did fancy. We used to have costume Fridays where we'd wear like comedy outfits. Batman and people like that. I went as, and I got my whole family to dress up, and we did, and it was a lot more. But since the pandemic, I have seen the opposite. I have seen that we don't do that anymore, and it's very much focused, productive. We don't bring the family in. We don't do social Fridays. We don't do any of those things. And when I try to bring them back, people are like, well, "I don't want to do that." And maybe because of the PTSD of the pandemic, and it's connected to that, and that's a negative time. Maybe they lost loved ones. Maybe they just hated the pandemic so much. But there's definitely something around that I think that, yeah. The other thing that's interesting as well, and maybe this is connected to the Scrum Master thing that we haven't talked about, but many organizations are getting rid of their Scrum Masters, firing agile coaches. People are less interested in how you work now. There seems to be a push back to, oh yeah, we did that during the pandemic. We did that, we tried that. We tried this whole agile thing. Let's just get back to getting stuff done. And I feel that individual productivity, organizational productivity has definitely dropped in proportion to that. I mean, we see it, gross domestic product, right? So at a very simple level, the country's productivity is how many working people divided by GDP, right? Very simple measure. We see that has not grown at the rates that we thought it should, based on the productivity tools. And I think there's lots of reasons for that. And I'm no economist, but I think to some extent it's because people aren't concentrating on helping us deliver. They just say do more. It's like, just work longer. And I think there's nobody, and at least the Scrum Master and the Agile coach was very much, most of them thought that they had some responsibility to create an environment for success and create an environment where people were collaborating more effectively, and whether they measured it was a whole different thing, but whatever that was, they were at least interested in it.
Yeah, I think I want to go back a little bit. What you said is people think they did that during the pandemic, and for me, it's like, no, nobody was working from home during the pandemic. It felt much more similar to a little bit different sentence, but similar to what you said earlier on. We're all working, living at work, but felt much more.
Yes,
because we're all stuck. We were not able to go out. There was so much other stuff. It's like, that was not what remote work is all about, and the people who've done it before were all saying it. We were also not prepared for anything. It's like, in many cases, well, if I talk about the company I was working with, I do remember on Monday discussing with my manager, like, okay, we maybe in this we should prepare for working from home because maybe it's dangerous right now. It's like, no, we will never do that. And I think on Thursday evening, the Belgium decided everybody works from home from next week on. And so Friday morning, we were organizing to do that, while Monday morning, my manager still said, we're never going to do that. So basically on that Thursday evening, I did prepare how to work with the teams. And so that was completely unprepared in many different kind of ways. So yeah, that thinking that we did work from home during the pandemic, it's just no, that's not what working from home was. We're only starting to, or the companies that never did that before are only starting to discover it now. That
I think that's very fair. Very fair.
Let's move to that next question about a book. And I know that you have quite a list of books that you
I
want to
know. I
recommend.
had a little bit of trouble with this. I tell you what I'm reading, which I'm not recommending. I've just, because of the world and what's happening in the world at the moment, I've been drawn down this very, very dark rabbit hole. I read the book, The End of the World is Just the Beginning. I don't know if you've had the opportunity to read that. Don't.
No.
It will make you
Okay.
really sad. It's literally what's happening in the world and why do civilizations fail, which is
So,
very, very dark as well, though more academic, less
so,
easy to read than the End of the World is Just the Beginning.
and so are people using it as a manual just like they did with 1984? Is that
Oh, well,
what's
so, or
happening
the
with that book?
Dictator's Handbook, which is also a really interesting manual as well. I think it's, I think I've tried to step back a little bit from these books and sort of go meta on them a little bit. I think to some extent you can watch anything or read anything and see things that connect, and you look at parallels continuously, and even if the parallels really aren't there, humans are really good at pattern recognition, right? That's why we are
Right.
the dominant species on the planet. Well, I guess cockroaches are the dominant species, but after cockroaches, we're definitely a good second or third. And mosquitos actually as well. But anyway, so the I think there's a little bit of pattern recognition that you just naturally, you read something and you go, oh, well, that's that, even though actually it isn't that. So I think there is some of that. However, the parallels, the sort of like the one characteristic of both these books is the fact that wealth becomes set. There tends to be not an even distribution of wealth. There tends to be Roman Empire is a great example of this, where the wealth moves very much up to a very small group, and it becomes more and more held by them, and they become more and more paranoid, and they become, and that's obviously the number of billionaires and their relationship with politics and the like has definitely changed, um, and the like. So I thought that was really, really interesting. But yeah, I wouldn't so I'm not recommending those books, because what I like with a book is that it does something that makes me either changes my behavior in a positive way, or does, unless it's a fiction book, which is a whole different thing. But in terms of those kinds of books, I'm looking for something that can give me something that's useful. And I've not found anything out of either of those books that's particularly useful, other than depressing, which isn't, and a dinner party conversation. They're incredibly powerful tools to use at dinner parties, because you're like, oh, I can sound really intelligent about what's happening in the world. So I wouldn't recommend that. But the reason
Let's.
why.
I want to.
Sorry.
Because you have quite a list of books, but what I will do is I will show some of the books that you mentioned, and then you can go to it, and that way we can keep the
That's
pace,
great.
and you can still talk about all of them. So why should I read this book, or
So
actually
this
I've
is
read
the
it, but why
original
should I
book
read
on this is the original book on OKRs, and by John Doerr. And what's interesting about this book is that it really sets the scene for it. Now, what's also interesting about this book is the examples are crap. Oh, sorry, are very poor, and they're the opposite of what OKR should be used for. So the great thing about this book is it sort of gives you both those perspectives: how easy an organization can instantly take objective key results and turn them into a tool for evil and not actually understand the implications of them. So I recommend the book because I think it's a really good foundational piece. However, the case studies and examples are actually, if you approach it with that curiosity mindset and that really, and look back to the beginning when he describes the why and say, well, this isn't obviously the why, is it? I think that's really, really interesting.
Yeah, I like that. Well, and for some people, it might be interesting some of the examples are from some more famous people. If I remember correctly, the audio version is actually letting these people do the conversations as well.
Mm.
So that so if you really want to yeah, see that this is people actually wrote these kind of things, they, from what I remember, they do speak it in. I do understand what you say about that, but I like the combination of the theory and the practices, and again the interactions in there. Like, okay, because this for me, what I don't know what's your experience with OKRs, but my experience with OKRs is that when I try this with teams, when I work with teams, it typically takes like probably the third iteration before the OKRs are really at some level that are really good. Even the second or the third company I worked with, we tried it out at when you start, the first thing that you're helping out is like, no, this is good. And then the second, then after using it's like, no, this is still not what we want. And then they get the third, it somehow seems that the third version is always, yeah, much better than the previous two ones. And from
Well, I think you're doing a fantastic job with your teams, actually, because I experience would indicate that it's probably 6 or 7
well,
iterations usually.
well, okay, let's rephrase it. It's not that they can't improve after the third one, but the third is the minimum level. Like I say, the first two is really like you think they're okay, and then when you start using it, you realize like no, they were not that good, and they were actually, yeah, for multiple kind of
It,
reasons not that
it
good.
is true to say that it takes at least one pass through, because until you've actually used it, it has to provide value, right?
Exactly.
And I think that until you've passed through at least once, there's no way you can get it right. After a few times you get into a routine, it doesn't mean the OKRs are going to be great, but it means at least the mindset that you approach those OKRs are is well shared and consistent across the team. I think objectives and measures, key results, are super crucial for how you do agility. And I think that a lot of organizations are missing that. The reason why product goal was added to the Scrum guide to go along with sprint goal was really to highlight the fact that Scrum teams need to be moving towards this overarching goal and incrementally making progress against that goal. And without that, the product backlog was just this fictitious list of things. You need that goal to set the context and put those guardrails. And in the same way as a sprint goal does that to the sprint backlog. And I
Exactly.
think those two commitments really do help frame how we use Scrum. Now, most organizations have a hard time defining both those two things. And then that highlights the issues that you mentioned earlier.
Exactly. Let's move to that next book. Um, what do you want people to know? Why
Well,
should people read this book?
this is really the reason why I bring this up is because, oh my gosh, if you want to learn and have like the perfect bibliography of every single thing that you need to have on your this book is, I mean, I find it incredibly rich. It talks about, how so team design. It talks about obviously the Toyota production system and design systems. It talks about Kanban. It talks about the theory of constraints. It talks about all of these things. Now, it's very hard going, but I use it really and it's very easy to get sort of rat holed, or sort of end up sort of going somewhere and googling something and ending up in this whole thing. But like team science, I didn't even know some of the sort of the academic research that went into this is just incredible. uh, Turner or Pooch and Nigel Thurlow did a fantastic job of building this bibliography. I think it's incredibly hard to enter it, but I think it's an incredibly valuable book.
It's not the first time that this book was mentioned, so I'm glad
Oh,
to see that books like this are mentioned. I think, is it the second or the third time? I don't remember, but it definitely came up already. And it's yeah, it's a book that I've discussed also offline with other people. So I'm glad to see this mentioned again. That kind of says also something about the book. Let's move to the next one. Why should people read this one?
So it's interesting that a couple of reasons why. One, I think it's probably the best document, long form document of professional Scrum and the implications of it. I think it's a really good, well thought through book. The other thing is the journey to get there. So that was the second book we wrote in the professional Scrum series, and Stephanie and Simon, the authors, worked with Ken, and it was a very fraught process because Ken, imagine you're a singer-songwriter, but you're helping somebody else write a song. It's very difficult. It was very difficult for Ken, and ultimately the resulting book was the product of that. And I think it's and obviously I'm reading a lot into it when I read it, because I remember the arguments and discussions, and Stephanie and Simon are very different to who Ken is, and the way they approach their clients is different. And I think the compromise or the balance that book provides between the sort of softer kind of approach to agility and the very hard Ken Schwaber approach, where you're an idiot or you're not, is I think it really bears testament to that style and that friction that is in the agile community, I think, between people that are very into the XP practices and the approaches around that, and the people that are more sort of coachy and more sort of like human factor kind of oriented.
Well, both Stephanie and Simon have been on the show. Simon, number 145, Stephanie, number 178. Well, actually, this is interesting because her interview is already recorded and will be published before this one will go live. But it's not published yet, so it's a little bit in between there. But really lovely conversations with both of them. So yeah, really wonderful. And let's move to that next book that you wanted to talk about, which has a very interesting title.
Zombie Scrum Survival Guide, which I think is it's a great title. When I was first introduced to this by Barry Ovum, who you probably know from the Scrum facilitators and the like, I was like, oh, it's an interesting idea. The graphics are great, but ultimately it's a very accessible guide for dealing with Scrum and Agile that isn't really working. And I think that for most organizations, you're going to find something inside that guide that provides some really interesting ideas of how you can improve the way that you work. And so it's a very useful book, I think, in that regard. The other thing is it provides the foundations for the work they're doing now, which is around, the effectiveness of teams. And, and Chris and Barry have gone off and really focused on, okay, so what are the things that really matter around good team behavior and delivering value to clients, etc. And they've done some academic actual work on that, which is the science of teams, which is invaluable. But it all started with this zombie Scrum and the ideas of that. So practical book, very useful. But also, if you follow their work, you can see the evolution to something that's, I think, going to really help our industry.
I agree. Thank you for bringing all these books up to that. Let's move to that next question, which is, for me, for a conversation that we've been going on for so long in all kind of directions, a very interesting question to ask. What's a question that you think I should also ask you, and what's the answer there?
Again, not an easy question, obviously, and that was the intent, right? But so Agile is 30 years, 40 years old, depending on how you measure it. If you believe certain Agile community people, it's like 100 years old, and it's one of the fundamentals of the universe. It's been going for so long. We know what works. We know how effective it is. So why is it so damn hard to apply it inside organizations? Why, when you go to these big companies who've got lots of really good things going for them, but ultimately they could do it so much better, and we know how to do it so much better. Why is it not as effective? Why is it not being practiced as effectively as we know we can practice it?
So do you have an answer to that?
Gosh, no, I wish I did. I'd be a very rich man. No, I am a rich man. I've got a beautiful family and a beautiful wife, so I'm already incredibly rich. But
and it's the richness that is probably bringing much more than, than.
although I wouldn't mind a big yacht in Saint-Tropez, though. But anyway, but who wouldn't, you know? Though I hear they're a pain to maintain. So why? I think it has had huge benefit in the world. I was talking to Ken Schwaber the other day over breakfast, and he was in town. He's moved away from Boston area, now lives in Ohio with his grandkids, one of his daughters and the grandkids. And I was talking to him, and he's like, he's despairing of why people on LinkedIn are still arguing about stupid things, he thinks, like definition of done and how long a sprint should be, and these silly things, right? And he's like, oh, we've failed. I've shown them what good looks like, and they're just too stupid to do it. And who was being very Ken Schwabery. And it was funny. I was eating my my breakfast burrito, which is absolutely amazing in the place we go, by the way. And I was just listening, and I stopped and I said, Ken, we've done a lot of great things. We, meaning the community, not me, probably. The world is a much better place. We're delivering software and products more effectively. The new Gillette razor, the exfoliating razor, was built using Scrum. The fact is, we've got organizations creating the next level of genetic manipulation, CRISPR, etc., to solve some of the world's most horrible genetic diseases. They're using Scrum. There's been so much good done with it, but there's still so much to do. And I think that ultimately now the challenge is, we've done all the low-hanging fruit almost, delivery pipelines, frequently delivering working software, test-driven development, quality teams are now integrated, design. We've now got to solve the really hard problems around value and around bureaucracy and around status and authority and all of these sort of things. We kind of ignored them and concentrate on the things like Scrum is very much team centric. It's very much focused on those things. And we've done a lot of good. We created $1 billion industry. People have got rich and put their kids through college because of Scrum. Amazing things, right? However, the next stage is going to be very challenging because it's about people's power and position and authority. And we need to change how people perceive those things, I think, for the next level of empowered teams, agile teams to really deliver. So I think at the heart of it, and people much smarter than me have written this in much more eloquent ways, but at the heart of it is, how do we think about things like that? So incentives, great example. Fidelity Investments was the second or third company ever to do Scrum, right? And the incentive model that was in place ultimately undermined Scrum every time. They were very successful in using Scrum and they delivered some amazing products. But then when it went back to business as usual, because of incentives, because of the way rewards and promotion, visible and invisible incentives worked, it discouraged people from sharing it, transparency. It discouraged many of the things that make Scrum successful. It discouraged it. Now, yes, they delivered software frequently. Yes, they had a great backlog. They minimized impediments on the team and stuff like that. But the stuff, decision making, authority, promotion, those sort of things were never really improved. And ultimately, it meant Scrum was Ken would perceive as a failure, even though some good things happened. And unless we can change those things, I think it's going to be incredibly hard for Agile and the like to really fundamentally change how we work to deliver the benefits that have been promised. And so I think I do have answers, obviously, like everybody, or no, not even answers, hypotheses, opinions, ideas. I think OKRs and goals and those things can really help. I think that how we do portfolio and funding needs to be more aligned to that, which product-based portfolio planning and the like, fund the products, not the work, things like that. I think those sort of things can definitely help. I also think that as the saying around science makes a lot of sense. They say that science progresses one funeral at a time, right? And I think that we're seeing different generations come through. I think that Generation Z and Generation Alpha, or whatever those other generations, have a very different perspective on status, authority. Some of these young adults went through high school in the pandemic, right? Very different social structures and the like. So I really do believe that we can see, that I think things are going to get better, but I think that the environment around Agile and Scrum needs to change to allow that, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do understand that. Oops, I don't know why my camera went out. That's kind of strange. Okay, I'm still here.
Because you were about to say something really profound, and the internet did not like
probably.
that.
Yeah, that could probably the camera is overheated. I don't understand why, but okay, because it's not that hot in here at this moment.
We know what you look like, Eve.
I will try to fix it, but I wanted to what did I want to say? Oh, yeah, the thing about not succeeding or succeeding, I do think that well, we did succeed in some companies and made things a lot better. We didn't succeed everywhere, that's for sure. And I also think yeah, things go back and forth a little bit, like you say with science. Is the some people don't like some of the progress that we're doing because then they have less power and what have you. And so I think there are things there that could still improve and that could still move things around. But still, I do think that we did make some progress at some kind of companies. And sometimes what I also see is that sometimes people learn that there could be progress and that it doesn't work at their company, and then they just move on to another company where it might work. And I felt really bad for that for a long time because, hey, companies are paying me to basically make people move because the company didn't improve as much as they could have. And somehow I now feel it as this is stupidity tax that the company is paying. If they get the people in, they improve, and then they don't want to improve, but the people learn about this new world, they might go away, and okay, then I feel less bad about it. And what I do see is that then the industry as a whole is improving. So yeah, there might still be improvements and things. I don't know. How do you feel about that kind of statement?
No, I do think that timing is everything, right? It's like that I on my journey, my dating history, I met lots of amazing people that I could have potentially married. I didn't marry. I ended up marrying the best girl in the world. But timing is definitely a factor, right? If me and Weez had met 5 years earlier, would we have got married? No, we probably had a lot of fun, but I'm not sure we'd have got married. We wouldn't be in the position we are now. Timing is everything, and that's true of organizations, I think, totally. I also think that the focus isn't to bring agile into an organization. The focus is to deliver value, to ensure that what in the environment, you have to go where they are and where they need to be and where they can be. There's it's like personal training, right? You're never going to make somebody an Olympic athlete, or very unlikely. the likelihood is that you'll make them a little bit better than they are. So I think you can always help. Now, there's obviously a philosophical question is, do you want to help somebody else, because that is more ready to take them to the place that you want to take them? Fair enough. But I think that at the end of the day, you have to appreciate that every organization is different and in a different stage of appetite. I do think, though, the world is a little bit worn out. Change fatigue is definitely, I'm seeing it with clients. Like, we're talking a lot about the agile product operating model at the moment. So product being a key construct for, particularly for internal IT organizations to deliver digital assets. And you can see that everybody's really interested in it, but everybody's kind of like a bit worn out. Now,
Right.
worn out for lots of reasons. Worn out because they survived the pandemic, and then after the pandemic, there was this crazy explosion of activity and energy. Worn out because we've got two horrible wars going on. Worn out because AI is coming, and we're not totally sure what that means. Worn out because the pace of change is a level. Worn out because we look at our assets, and we look at the price of things, and we're like, how the heck's worn out because we look at for our kids and their future. That you can, again, going back to the end of the world is just the beginning. Sorry, it has definitely influenced me. I need to stop that. But I think that there is some change fatigue as well. But I ultimately believe exactly as you do. I think the world is a better place because of agile. And I don't think the journey is done, whether it's called agile or whether it's called whatever. I don't really care. But the ideas are going to be really relevant to my children, and they're going to be practicing those ideas in pursuit of their passions and the value that they're going to deliver in society.
Well, and I want to first of all, I agree with that. I really like that. I do think that things are better for our children. And in that sense, it was really interesting for me to have conversations here with agilists and then their children who might be young adults or adults. So I had Diana Larson here, and I had her son William here. I had yeah, can't come up with the different kind of names, but I had multiple people here with their typically separate. But these are always very interesting conversations. And then what you see is basically you have children that have been growing up in an agile world because
Mhm.
they've been learning about Scrum or Agile or whatever kind of thing basically from day one when they were born. Not always, because of course there is always another partner who might who also has an influence on these children. But still, the in many cases the conversations are around the fact that okay, I didn't know, there was no names for it. There was no okay, this is a stand up or agile, whatever. But the ideas, the values were all there in growing up, and it's really interesting to see how these children then become adults that might move on in an agile world because they might do scrum master roles or whatever, or something completely different.
It is interesting that you bring that up, because we had a very big charitable thing that we did, and I don't want to. I mean, it sounds with this organization called Year Up. Year Up. They provide vocational training to young adults that graduate high school that are in disadvantaged circumstances. So you can imagine graduating in a city high school, and the future is pretty bleak. You go and work at Target. You go and work. If you're lucky, you're doing McDonald's as well. It's like the opportunities, and maybe you've got brothers and sisters that you're having to support as well, and awful environments some of these young adults went through. And we ended up I paid our trainers to teach these people Scrum. We have a training class called Applying Professional Scrum. It's a you actually have problems that you solve, and you use Scrum, and you sort of Scrum evolves through the use, right? And it was really super interesting, because these people, young adults, a very different circumstance, and they grabbed Scrum so easy. And it was really, there was a large consulting company that we were training at the same time. And I actually got involved in the training, which I never would do because I'm awful at training. So I just want to talk too much. But in the day, in Monday, Tuesday, I was training this large, very, very prestigious consulting company and their new recruits. And then on Wednesday and Thursday, I was training these young adults in inner city Boston. And it was just so obvious who got it quicker and better. However, they still needed the construct of Scrum. It was natural, but you had to still show them it. You know what I mean? As soon as you gave them the construct, they were like, "Oh my gosh, of course, this makes sense." And so one young adult has started a jeans company, and which is really, really cool. Another one ended up going to work for Partners Healthcare and is a Scrum Master, because these were and this was a few years ago. And it's just incredible the opportunity that Scrum has given them. You did have to give them that construct. It isn't natural, even though it is incredibly natural for them. You know what I mean? They need the words to verbalize the process.
That I can definitely see that, and well, this is something that would have been interesting to ask for Scarlett Sahota or to Willem Larsen, to see if that was needed for them as well, or they learned it in these kind of things. But yeah, it's definitely something I think in the future we'll see much more people who learn this kind of agility from their parents, because one of them or maybe both of them are in the agile space and learning so some of these things, because it can work and at different kind of levels, and yeah, that's definitely an interesting one. Yeah, I don't want to go too much into that, but I at a recent bar camp in Belgium, I also talked about how agile saved my marriage. Of course, a big metaphor that is exaggerated, but how some of these things really help out in getting connections and having even things like, I wouldn't call it stand-ups, but daily having a short meeting with my partner just to go over how was your day, what is the things that we need to know for tomorrow, regular kind of reviews, retro, something in between, like some one time a week to just go over, okay, what can we improve, what are the things that we actually did this week together and not,
and it also taught you there was only one product owner in your house, right? And I don't think it's you, Eve. I don't mean to be rude, but
that's well, yeah. Well, I have 3 children, so I'm not sure if there's only one product owner, but that's
well, that is an interesting conversation unto itself.
Exactly. Let's move to that next question, because we've already been talking and mentioning a couple of people, but who do you think I should ask next?
So I would recommend, if you've not had the chance to talk to Barry and Christian, the Liberators, and the work that they're doing around sort of academic and both practical research on teams, I would recommend those 2 guys. They are obviously local to you as well, right? They are in the Netherlands.
The Netherlands, indeed.
Yeah,
not
which
Belgium,
is sort of
the Netherlands.
next door, and which is
door enough to mean that well, let's the agile conference that started a lot in Belgium is or in the Belgium and Netherlands is XPD Benelux, which was actually a collaboration between Belgium and the Netherlands. So I've run into both of these. So these are the 2 people that you're talking about.
Oh, they are awesome people as well. Amazing human beings, passionate, smart, just the people you'd want to sit down and have a beer with, honestly.
Exactly. So that's definitely good things, and indeed what they're doing with the Liberators is very nice with what they're doing there. So really wonderful. So thank you for inviting them, because I think that is indeed a good idea to have conversations with both of them. So really, I'm really looking forward to that. Now, Dave, we've been talking a little more than 2 hours. We had a small breach in the middle, but I don't think we lost 10 minutes, so we'll definitely talk more than 2 hours now. If people want to reach out to you, what's a good way to connect with you?
Obviously, LinkedIn is a great thing.
Should be the
yeah, exactly. I'd recommend that. and this old-fashioned thing called email, dave.west@scrum.org. You may have heard of this. Obviously, our younger viewers are like, what is that thing? I've heard about it. But yeah, feel free to do that. But LinkedIn's a great tool. Please feel free to reach out. I love talking about this stuff. Now, unfortunately, I don't talk to the ratio 2 ears, 1 mouth, but I'm aspiring and in trying to improve that every day.
Well, today was the intention also to have you talking more than me, so that was definitely perfectly fine for today, I would say. But it was for me a really wonderful conversation. It's yeah. These days, like I've been saying, I'm with children that are almost out of the house. I try to spend more time at home, so going less to conferences, but this is my way to connect out to the community, and still, yeah, within, I don't know, 5 to 10 minutes after this conversation, I can join my family again, after I'm sure that this video was downloaded correctly, so that we don't have to redo this. But yeah, really wonderful time, so I'm really thankful for that time. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
It was my pleasure. Well, actually, yeah, you invited others, others have invited you, so this is a very nice way to do that. So
okay then, au revoir, bye-bye.
Thank you for watching Who's Agile, where the stories of agilists come to life. I hope you liked today's interview. Subscribe if you're not subscribed and want to get to know other agilists.